Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of the Better Death Collective podcast, where we'll get to pick the brains of two of our favorite death doulas, Trina Wacasey and Agnes Dussault. While the term death doula is quickly making its way into the American lexicon, maybe the conventional view of a death doula as a caring person simply sitting by a dying person's bedside is already outdated. As Trina and Agnes will make clear, being a death doula is so much more. From helping loved ones find as much peace as possible, to helping the dying face their fears and make the necessary arrangements, being a death doula is a big deal, a calling only for a few brave and gentle souls. So, let's hear it from the heroes themselves, Trina Wacasey and Agnes Dussault.
Hi everybody, Ed Bixby here with Matt Connell from the Better Death Collective. Today we have a couple of special guests, death doulas. Whether or not you do or do not know what that term means, we're going to find out what that means today. So I'd like to introduce Trina Wacasey from the Bay Area in California. Trina is a friend of mine personally and has worked alongside with me at one of my facilities, but she's very experienced. And then we have Agnes Dussault that is from the Minneapolis area, and Agnes is a GBC volunteer and a death doula as well. And what we would like to do today is get into the discussion as to what a death doula is and what their purpose would be and how they support families. And for those of you who don't know, the definition of a death doula or a death midwife or life guide or home funeral guide, whatever you would decide or choose to use as a definition, is a person who assists in the dying process. Practitioners may include such things as death plans, spiritual, psychological, and social support, and logistical activities like guiding mourners in their rights and responsibilities. But I'm not going to go any further into that because I know it's much more than that. So I'd like to introduce Trina and Agnes to our episode.
Hi, ladies. Thank you so much both for coming. We really appreciate it. Very grateful.
Grateful to be here. Thank you.
Well, maybe we could start with a little bit of background from each one of you. Trina, why don't you please share a little bit about how you got started in your death doula journey, and where has it taken you today?
Yeah, I'd be happy to start. I actually, I guess it started for me during my dad's dying process. Back in 2012, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in April, and he died in May. He died a month later. It was all very quick. And this was in Houston, back when I lived in Texas. My brothers and I were with him. We had hospice. But what I discovered is hospice is not providing 24/7 support. They're wonderful, and I would always recommend people work with hospice. But they're not there all the time. And there's a lot of overwhelm and chaos and stuff going on, questions you don't know the answers to, you don't know who to ask. And it's tumultuous and scary and all that. And then all of the family stuff that, any problem that you ever had in your family is going to start oozing out during this time, and I think Dad would want it this way. Well, you always, were the oldest and you thought this, but you never listened to me. So all that stuff was going on in there. You're trying to do the best that you can for your loved one who's dying, but you need kind of a referee sometimes and just a calming influence, someone to just come in and say, this is scary, this is tumultuous, and I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you keep the situation calm. I'm going to help you find answers to the questions that you have. I might know some, and if I don't, I know people that we can call. So that's really how I got started.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned that because a lot of people, the term death doula has become part of our lexicon more and more. Like people kind of understand what it is, or have at least heard of it. But I think that the vision that we have in our head is of somebody just sitting by somebody's bedside and helping them literally die. just being there for them. But it's so much more than that, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. And it is difficult to describe what we do. Agnes, you probably agree, because there are so many things that we do. And I think there's 20 things I could do as a doula. There's 2 or 3 that I really enjoy doing. But I'll do the others too. So, yeah. Agnes, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've thought a lot about like how do I define death doula work as within the setting of introducing myself, or when I let someone know I'm a death doula, how do I follow that up? And I try to always start by saying that for me, being a death doula means that I am an advocate and companion for all those interested in focusing on and leaning into their relationship with death, no matter where they are at in their journey with life. So I work with people who are very young all the way and very healthy, and then people who are transitioning into active dying. And so with that, that's obviously a very wide range, and I'm still figuring out my like core services that I enjoy the most, and learning ones that I didn't think I was going to enjoy that now I really am enjoying a lot. And my hope is just to make sure that people know that, well, yes, we are helping people with dying. Like many death doulas are doing services that are very much before and even after the death process, and that the scope is just as wide ranging as the scope of the grief and the experience of the family, the people in their communities going through the dying process.
Well said.
That's really interesting. Do you think what do you each see when you first meet your clients? Typically, are you dealing with somebody who's terrified? Are you dealing with somebody who's just what is the average scene when you first are introduced to a client? Trina, if you wanna share.
Yeah. Um, what I've been seeing recently is usually a child of someone who's dying who comes to me, and they would like for the dying process to go more smoothly for their loved one. They see that something's missing, maybe the ability to connect with their children, or to accept that they're dying. And they want the dying process to go smoothly for their loved one. And so I'm sort of more there for that child, helping them help the person who's dying as much, if not more, than for the person who's dying sometimes.
And and let me ask you this, Trina and Agnes, because I hear that, and I resonate with that, because I think what a lot of people don't understand when it comes to death and dying is typically the individual who may be passing can actually accept their passing. It's the living that need the help.
Mm.
Cemeteries and services like this many times are for the living, to help them through the process itself. So I don't know if that's the same perspective. It sounds very similar to me in the work that I do. Uh, but I mean, I can tell the audience, from personal experience, that this movement is absolutely growing, and people like Agnes and Trina are vitally important to that movement. We need these people to help guide and assist in a different and a new way. So I do commend you, ladies, for the work that you do. Uh, the one
Definitely.
I would like to ask the two of you would be, sometimes the lines get blurred. And I know sometimes families don't understand what the role of a death doula is or what that means. They actually think that may be a licensed funeral director. So I would ask you, ladies, if you could currently explain, what, if any, regulation process exists, so that if a family did want to procure your services, they could have a better understanding of what you could provide. Uh, so, either or, whoever would like to tackle that one.
Um,
Agnes, are you okay since I just spoke?
Yeah, totally, totally. So I would say first, like with you, just using the word new, I always like to remind people that like what death doulas are doing isn't new. And like with green burial and many practices within the death field right now, we're returning to knowledge and wisdom that communities have done and known for many years, centuries, like before industrialization and outsourcing a lot of care and services, like death and the end of life has been with the people, the families, the communities, and there have always been doulas. So, one of the biggest goals in the movement is to help bring back that knowledge and to see that we can live in a world where we have all of these resources. And my goal, then going to your question of like when people are trying to figure out what I can offer them, I love to make sure that people do have a broad understanding of death doulas. So I start with sending a couple resources. One of the one things I think that people should know, at least in the States, is that NEDA exists, the National End of Life Doula Alliance, and they have a lot of great resources for defining doulas. They also have a doula directory and just a lot of things to figure out what does it all mean. But for me, when someone's interested in potentially working with me, I think it's really important for us to have a consultation. I offer it for free, and that's just for us to have a conversation or two that gets more into the depth of what are they looking for, and for me to give them examples and experiences of what I can offer within that. But I also believe that it is a very important role for me to be a resource sharer. So I always want to help people if I can offer some of the services that they want and they feel that we are a compatible fit and I feel the same. I will also help them to find their home funeral director, which I'm not certified in at this point or haven't studied enough to feel confident in. And all of those services like estate planning, like one of my biggest duties is to help with education and to help share those resources for education.
Is that
Wow.
well, Trina?
I can jump in as far as regulations, doulas, and funeral directors and my experience with that these days. I actually thought about trying to become a funeral director to overcome the obstacles that I'm confronted with regularly. Um, there is actually a doula in California, Keila Murphy, who has been cited by the California Funeral Board, the Cemetery Funeral Board, for acting like a funeral director. And she's a, I, I look at her, I think of her like Norma Ray, you know, she's out there leading the charge for doulas, and the funeral establishment is coming after her. She has some wonderful attorneys who have represented her. She stated her case back in February, and a judge is still, we're still waiting to hear how the judge is going to rule on the case. But you know, she's been a nonprofit for 15 years helping families do wonderful things in the Grass Valley, Nevada City area. And for her to be attacked like that, it just feels awful. So I'm thinking, you know, if I need to go become a funeral director so that I'm not attacked in that way, so I can do the more natural family involved things, then maybe that's what I need to do. So that's
Well, at the
kind
same
of where
time,
I'm
it's
at.
almost like a necessary part of progress. You know,
Yeah.
somebody's got to, um, I don't want to say sacrifice themselves, but definitely has to deal with some, uh, some inconveniences that come with paving new ground, paving a new path.
Yeah.
You know, in
Ed,
life,
what?
the voice that needs to be heard. Bureaucracy gets in the way of a lot of living, and
Yeah.
you
Oh
know, when you're
man.
people, unfortunately, governmental rule and regulation that didn't exist, like Agnes had pointed out prior. And I do apologize for using the word new because I know it's not new, but it's funny. It's like people look at, say, for instance, natural burial, and they say, "Wow, how are you making out with that new?" And it's like, that's what we've done since the dawn of time. And
Yeah.
we
Mm-hmm.
realized that, everyone, I tell my customers, and I just want to say this because I think it's important for the listeners, And in particular, with the death doula conversation, I have families who say to me on a regular basis that they don't know that they can participate in the event because it might be too hard for them. And I say to them, it's never required. Of course, we just always encourage it. But what I do know is that, and I'm sure you ladies know and can speak to, we all possess the ability. It's in our DNA. It's locked up in a little box in our brain. And once that's unlocked, people were absolutely amazed at the transformation as to how the event and how the process goes.
Yeah.
So, I think that might lead us into a question that the viewers might really be interested in the sense that how does, personal experiences from you, Agnes, and from you, Trina, how have you seen the positive effects of the work that you do and how it's impacted the families?
That's a good one. Agnes, you want to start?
Sure, yeah. Well, I would say, like, before having a lot of hands-on experiences, I was definitely someone who was obsessed with researching everything about this work and learning all about the different elements of grief. And I really love someone who's a big person in, I would say, the United States, at least with the death field, Caitlin Doughty, and she did a really great talk about why she thinks we should spend time with dead bodies, and specifically the dead bodies of those that we love and are related to. And what I would say is that we have a lot of research about grief at this point, and we know that, like, when we are not interacting with end of life and death, and when we're not, our fear stops us from engaging to such a degree, it's not oftentimes helpful for grief. It's oftentimes harder on grief. And what I've seen in my own personal experience, I volunteer oftentimes. I volunteer for multiple organizations, including hospices, and I am on call for sitting vigil or 11th hour, which is during that active dying process, oftentimes lasting like a few days to a week, sometimes less, sometimes more. And in that experience, with interacting with families and the person who's dying, what I see time and time again is when given the opportunity and the space to feel safe and calm and given education about what is going on in this process, the way that it shifts someone's ability to feel comfortable and know that it's scary and hard, but know that they are supported and that it's okay and that they're not alone in this. It is just amazing to see the gratitude from everyone and to see how people, I interacted with someone right after their first time saying goodbye to a friend and being in that active dying space, and she just kept reaching out to me, thanking me for what it meant for her. And it was only like a short visit of less than like 15 minutes, and she just wants to keep doing that. So I think, just in my experience, it's been amazing to see what people feel when given the opportunity to be in that space.
Which ultimately, to me, as a non-death doula, I look at your role as, in a very basic way, is making it easier to die. You're helping these people be more at peace when they finally pass. I mean, am I overly simplifying there? You think?
No, you're not. No. I was thinking about a memorable experience. Ed, you'll appreciate this. So I was out at Parissima showing people around one Saturday, right? And I was coming back, so it's in Half Moon Bay, and I live in Los Altos. It's a 45-minute drive back over the mountains from the ocean to my home in Los Altos. And halfway there, I got a call from the daughter whose mother was dying, and she was overwhelmed with the situation. Her mom was declining rapidly. Other siblings were around. They had called in a nurse to come in and take care, because they weren't sure what was happening. And she called me and she said, Trina, we don't know what to do. Her home was like 5 minutes away from where I was. It was so cool. And I said, well, I can just stop by. She couldn't believe how available I was. So I stopped by, and you walk in a situation where it is very chaotic and loud and messy. And a nurse was there, but the mother was dying, and she had this piece of a baggie with with ice in it, and she was trying to cool the mother off, and with this plastic up against her skin, and I'm like, she's dying, and that plastic against her skin, the mother was actually wincing, when the nurse would press against her skin. And I'm thinking, I don't want to immediately come in here and usurp the authority of a medical professional, but this seems all a little weird. And so I just kind of observed the situation for a while, and talked to the daughter who brought me in aside quietly. And the hospice nurse was coming in soon. And I said, why don't we do this? Why don't we ask the hospice nurse to assemble all of the family and talk about how we can give your mother a more peaceful, calm ending. Each of you can go in quietly and have your time with your mom. There's a football game in the other room. Let's close the door. And if y'all want to watch the football game, you can, but let's try to have some calming music here and turn the lights down. And don't talk in the room loudly about your mother. Talk to your mother, and just give them some tips for how they could give her a beautiful ending and calm themselves down. And it just felt good to be able to come in and give them some strategies, some things that they could do to calm their fear and emotions and just not knowing what to do. They're just all doing the best they can, but they don't know what to do. And her family looked a lot like my family. They all were well-intentioned, but know-it-alls who think they know what their parent needs. You need to do it this way, and everybody's telling everybody how we're going to take care of Dad. And it's like, time out. Let's just do this one at a time and go in and have your time with your family. Everybody's smiling there. Maybe y'all have families like mine. I don't know, or I've seen that, but.
Yeah, I love all of that, and I love how you use the word observation. I feel like as I do this work, something I love about it so much is that I feel like being with death teaches me everything about being with life and being myself. And the lessons are just so important to me. And what I've reflected on again and again with bedside and vigil is that the best gift that I can give to anyone and the best gift that people can give to me is to be fully present. And I train volunteers who want to be sitting bedside at 11th hour now. And what I always try to tell people is that helping them understand that they actually do know how to do this by, when you enter the room, observing everything you can that's going on before acting on anything, trying to find what's on the wall, what are the hints where if someone doesn't have that vigil plan, how can you learn about what is their body doing, how are they feeling, what art do they have, what books do they have, how is the family acting, what's the lighting like, and taking in all of that and being all right with that silence and that slowness helps you to really show up in the best way without even needing to be a family member or someone that has known that person for their whole life. And I love vigil plans because I really do think that while we don't know what our active death is going to be like necessarily, we can't plan for what's going to be right for sure. It oftentimes with those families that maybe think they know or have no idea what they know, I think vigil planning and active dying plans or end-of-life plans in general are such a huge gift to everyone that loves you, because what I see again and again is that people want to control a situation and want to have something to do within that situation that's helpful and right. And when given even the smallest tasks of mom telling you she would love it if you could play this CD, or she would love it if there's only this amount of people in the room at a time. And seeing when people have had vigil plans and given even the smallest hints, it is so beautiful to see how people feel confident in honoring that person.
I like that.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it really comes down. People feel helpless. They feel helpless in that moment, and unfortunately, we live in a society where people like to feel in control. So when people cannot feel in control, they need help to find that place. So my question to you both would be, for instance, for anyone watching this who doesn't know a lot about, the death doula movement or the services you provide, I guess the biggest question that they may have at the moment would be something like how, when, and why, meaning how would they find someone that offers these services? When would it be a good time to talk about, these services? And why, which I think we've covered a lot of that with what we've said. But how, for both of you ladies, you're in two different demographic areas, but we know that this movement's grown obviously across the country. If whoever would like to go on that one, or maybe you can split it up.
Yeah, Agnes, do you want to go first?
Um,
You mentioned Nita.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I can go first. So I believe pretty strongly, I would say, that it's never too early and it's never too late to find a death doula. You, as I mentioned briefly earlier, you can be an incredibly healthy person overall and not have any sort of destination in sight for your death or diagnosis. And like myself, I've made my vigil plans. I'm talking to everyone in my community. I'm planning my funeral. And so that's what I encourage for people at any point. I think we can all benefit a lot from being and thinking about our own death. And for me, it has taught me a lot more how to be my own self in this life. And also, it's very common that maybe you don't want to think about that. You're not ready. It's not for you right now. There's a lot of things going on where you're not in the same place as I am, and that is totally all right. A big part of being a death doula is meeting people where they're at. And so oftentimes maybe it is that someone you really love just got a terminal diagnosis, or something's going on within your health where you're very concerned and wanting to plan. There are so many things that might trigger this thought in your mind, but just know that it's never too early and never too late. I think that NEDA, the National End of Life Doula Alliance, is a great place to go about finding a death doula. I would also say ask your friends and family. When you can find a death doula connected to your community, that's also really beautiful and can be really helpful. But outside of NEDA and your own community, there are so many end of life doula death organizations that are starting to create directories like NEDA. So I trained with a company based out of Los Angeles, California called Going with Grace, and they have started a doula directory. And I also am a member of the Minnesota Death Collaborative, which is for anyone working within the field or anyone interested in end of life. So highly recommend membership with Minnesota Death Collaborative, but they also have a directory. So the internet is wonderful, and there's many ways to find doulas that way too.
You Ed, you
There's
had
a,
mentioned earlier that this is like not a new thing necessarily, but it's an ancient thing, just like green burial is. I just wanted to share a little experience that I had. The couple that I had met in a very rural part of Wisconsin. I was at a cookout at their house. They had a big party, and it was very old school. These were, very minimalist type people. They were vegetable farmers. They raised sheep. They did things in a pretty traditional way. And the husband, his mom lived with them, and she had gotten a terminal illness, and they were handling things in a traditional way, where they were acting as death doulas, and they were side by side with his mom the whole time, even the kids, the whole family. And when she died, they kept her on the front porch, in a pine casket, and so all the neighbors could come by and pay their respects, and they slept out there with her. They had their sleeping bags, the kids had their tent. And then when it came time to bury her, they were going to do it in the traditional way and bury her in the backyard. Well, the county caught wind of this and came in and said, no way, you cannot do this. You're not zoned for this. This is not appropriate. They're like, we're in the middle of nowhere. You know, we live in a farmland forest. You know, we have been doing this for a long time. Well, you can't anymore. This isn't 1890. You can't do this. It's like, well, why not? And so they ended up getting the whole community involved, all of their neighbors, all of the farmers that were just like them. And they said, don't worry about it. We got this covered. You know, we will take care of you. Don't worry about the county. We'll come in and just basically circle the wagons around this funeral. And it was such a beautiful story. But you could see the tears kind of well up in their eyes as they were telling this. They were so bitter about this interference from the government coming in and tainting this, what was beautiful about it. And I said, actually, if you step back from it, the fact that everybody came together and protected this ritual, you know, and protected you and your mother-in-law, adds to the beauty of the story. I think I just thought it was such a beautiful thing, and it was good to hear because we were having experiences with the government of our own at that time, so I needed some advice, you know.
Were they able to bury their mother on the property?
They just did it. Yep, they did
Wow.
it in a pine casket. They put it in. They were like, it was time. She had to be buried. And so they had to do it, and they didn't have time to go through the whole process. So it was happening. And so they did it, and they were going to find them. They were going to do all these things, get the environmental services committee involved, and people were like, "You got to be kidding me! Don't you have bigger fish to fry?" So it was a sad story, but not, like I said, not so sad in that it was, you know, inspiring to know that there are still pockets of America that are still doing this. And Agnes, not far from you and I. This was in Amory, Wisconsin, out in the country. It was really cool. They raised all their own food, did things in the traditional way.
That is a beautiful story. You know, I think just as the funeral industry really grew out of the Civil War, I think the death doula movement is taking us back to pre-Civil War times, you know, that this is the way we used to do things, and reminding people, you can do it yourself. You know, you don't need a doula if you just have it in your DNA. You know how to take care of your loved ones. If you want us to be there, we would love to be there and hold your hand and give you confidence, saying, yeah, you're doing well. But I love that story.
You know, on that, you know, what do you each have any specific stories? You know, I understand you want to respect your clients and their families and not share names or specific times or anything, but any experiences that you've had that really stand out as memorable, like anything that was just truly uplifting or just, you know, even just bizarre, you know, what experiences really stand out in your memory? Agnes, if you want to go ahead.
I feel like I started the other question, Trina. Do you want
Did you? Okay, yeah, sure, no problem.
You start this one, Trina, and I'll go after.
I have a recent experience. I don't know that it's bizarre, but it's heartwarming, I think. So through Ed's Destination Destiny website, someone from San Luis Obispo contacted me and said, "You're a death doula. My mother is dying. Could you help?" And I said, "Well, I'm like 3 hours away, but I do have a network of doulas, and I happen to have a very good friend who's a doula in San Luis Obispo, so hook them up." I did ask this young woman whose mother was dying, would you like to do a home funeral? She was going to do medical aid and dime. She had a neurological degenerative disease, and she chose to end her suffering with medical aid and dime. She had a nurse there to help with that. And then after that, would you like to be involved in the care of your mom and spend some time with your mom? And this young woman, probably 26 years old, third-year medical student, had never heard of it before. Didn't know she could do that. And she goes, well, yeah, I guess. Okay. And so Kelly and I went through the experience with her of just having her mom there and talking to her, sharing stories, laughing, crying, reading poems, using essential oils on her hands and her feet, and talking about where her feet have taken her and what her hands have done. And there was also, her brother was there too. So it was like a 26 and a 22-year-old who were being introduced for the first time to this rite of passage with her mother, who had just died. And Kelly and I were walking them through. We ended up leaving that evening, and they ended up having their mom with them in her house overnight, and the mortuary was going to come the next day. When Kelly and I left, I wasn't sure how the kids, I was hoping the kids were going to be okay with this, and that we weren't traumatizing them in some way. The next morning, we came back to shroud the body and make sure she was ready to go for the drivers who picked up from the mortuary. And the kids said that they slept in the room with her mom, and that it was beautiful. And that made me feel so good, knowing that that's the way we want it to go. They were so courageous because they weren't sure what they were getting into, but it seemed to be something that really meant a lot to them. And actually now the third-year medical student, I'm thinking we might have influenced her to go into palliative care or something like that, but certainly to share the message with all of her patients when death comes, that there is this opportunity to be with your loved one after they die, and the body doesn't have to be rushed off. And that family also used as a cemetery in Queston, and so we got to witness and be a part of a natural burial, and it was beautiful too. And the kids just, it felt like that's exactly what they wanted for their mother, and they knew their mother, this was so her. And so it was just so inspiring to be a part of that whole experience. And it was very organic and natural, and we were all just kind of figuring out what we're going to do. And I like that informality and authenticity and bumps along the way, and you just figure it out, and it just seemed really special.
I believe I've seen photos of that cemetery, or that funeral.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
Really beautiful.
It was.
Wow. That's a great story.
And one thing yet before Agnes goes, because I believe this, and I know both of you will concur, I think. The most interesting thing about what you've done is you've created a memorable experience out of one of the worst possible times of someone's life. So I think that's important. But go ahead, Agnes. I apologize.
Yeah, it's hard to like pick, but I have had the opportunity to volunteer and work in a variety of clinical settings and long-term care settings. And in one of the long-term care settings that I've done work in, there are people that range from only living there for a couple weeks to people who live there for 5 or more years. And I specifically remember a couple different deaths where it was our practice. It's our practice to offer a send-off after the person passes, and this happens when the funeral home comes and the body is moved to a communal space before leaving the building. And family, as well as staff, as well as other friends, residents living in the building, are all welcome to attend and to share a memory or say goodbye. And what has been really cool in that type of setting is to see and allow the shared grief and mourning amongst people who know someone from so many different spaces who don't always connect. And I witnessed nurses hugging and crying with the family members and loved ones that they had never met before, and being able to thank each other, and friends who I didn't know how well they knew the person until they shared their memory, and people writing poems for the person, and people talking after. And that's something I've been realizing that I love so much within this work, is helping to see. I find that movement is such an important part of moving through grief and understanding how to live after the people that we love so dearly can no longer be here with us. And so just to see people feel like they can talk to other people who loved their people has been some of like the best stuff that I've been honored to witness and be part of.
Wow. That's really
I'm just
beautiful.
drinking that in. I love that as the communal space. That is so cool. I just love that. I want to do more of that here in my area. So you're a
Yeah.
real inspiration.
Oh, thank you. I mean, the more that I lean into that, I just love it so much, because to me, one of the biggest goals in my role as a death doula, I want to like shift our culture of death, and I want less of us to be afraid of it, of course. And so I always try to directly communicate when I'm working with people that I'm encouraging us to share this experience and to reminisce and to process and to not have it end at any point, but to continue to engage in a way that helps us to keep these people living past their death, and also in a way that helps us to learn that end of life, death, and dying does not need to be isolating, and that we are all in this together and we can show each other that.
Very, very nice put.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think that is? I see that a lot, and I hear that a lot. The more experience I gain in the death care world, I realize that people simply don't discuss death. They're afraid. It's a taboo. It's maybe like you're inviting it in. It's better to just pretend that it's not a thing. It's not a concern. I see it with my own family members. I've seen it with people that I've just struck up conversations with. What do you think that is? Is that something that's specific to American culture? I imagine not. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's definitely specific to our culture. There are other cultures, no doubt, that might suffer from that too. Probably the more industrialized cultures who have anesthetized death and pushed it to the medical establishment or to some establishment who can go over there and take care of it, because we've been convinced that it's nasty, it's dirty, it's scary, we're going to mess it up. Uh, Push this stuff to the professionals who know what they're doing. And so I think it is definitely a part of our culture. We've anesthetized it so much to the extent that we are losing the opportunity to care for our loved ones the way we know how to. And we're giving that over to somebody else. So if we can educate people of the value of doing it yourself and giving them the confidence that you can do it yourself. And if you're at all nervous, we'll come in and we'll hold your hand and we'll help you. If you don't need us, we'll back up. Then I think that we've done our job. But just to remind people that you've always had this opportunity, you still have this opportunity, and don't miss the opportunity. It's a unique opportunity, a unique time.
So it's about the freedom of choice. We as Americans have that right, and people just have to know that the options exist. and that they can do it if they'd like. And, I really appreciate the fact that you two ladies were able to come on our podcast today to enlighten people a little bit about what you do and what the movement means to really to us as Americans and to a world, on a whole. We could talk about this subject. It's so interesting. You could go on forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that we inspire people who listen to want to know more. What I'd like to ask the two of you is that, because you've given us the opportunity to speak to you, we'd like to give you guys the opportunity as well to talk to the listener and tell them a little bit about, your geographic area. And if they were to, for instance, want to speak to Trina Wacasey or want to speak to Agnes Dussault, how can they reach out to you guys, and how can you point them in the right direction, and how can you help them, maybe find the right network for themselves? So, Trina, if you want to start, and then Agnes, but yeah, please do tell the audience a little bit about, how they can reach out.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. Yeah. So my company is called Creating Honoring Spaces, and so you can just type that in Google and see my website. And I operate here in the Bay Area, but really virtually, after COVID, we all realized we could be talking to anybody anywhere in the world who might be listening to this, who might want to chat with us. They certainly could do that. So if you go to my website, Creating Honoring Spaces, one of the things that I offer too on my website is what I call a hospice assessment tool and a funeral home assessment tool. And I help clients find the hospice that aligns with them and find a funeral establishment that aligns with them and what they want. And in that assessment tool, I've integrated working with a doula. How does the hospice work with the doula? How does the funeral home work with the doula? It's a little bit self-serving, but it's like I'm the bridge between these two. And so that's something that folks can look at on my website too as a potential resource when they need it. So.
Yeah, and I am currently operating out of the Twin Cities area of Minnesota, and I am working on my website. But the best way to reach me is to just send me an email. I don't know if we can maybe put the email address in the notes somewhere of the podcast, but my email
Sure.
address is deathdouladussault@gmail.com. So deathdoula with my last name @gmail.com, and set up a free consultation with me, even if you have no idea if you want to work with a doula yet. It's free, and it's just us having a conversation to figure out what you're thinking and what you're wanting.
Wow.
Oh, and I would just also echo what Trina said. I can do almost all of my services virtually and love to do both. I want to meet y'all where you're at and help you in the best way.
Yeah.
Wow. That's great. Like Ed said, I feel like we've just scratched the surface here. Like I feel like we could just go on and on and on. I hope that each of you would be willing to come back at some point. I think this is just a great conversation. And as we're talking, I'm thinking, I've got more and more and more questions, but it's like, I think that we should just come back at some point.
That sounds great. Yeah, love to.
If you'd be willing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like a rabbit hole. Once you go down it, you just don't know where it's gonna end up. But I do want to thank Trina Wacasey and Agnes Dussault, of course, my co-host Matt Connell. We here at the Better Death Collective are here to bring good quality information and education when it comes to death care to the community and to the providers themselves. And please do like us. Please do like Trina and Agnes as well, because I think at the end of the day, we've all learned a lesson being in this movement that even if people aren't listening, you still have to be the voice in the room, because eventually they will listen, because if that voice is not heard, then nothing will be accomplished. So I do appreciate your time today, and look forward to this going up and to the next one. So thank you, ladies.
Yes. Thank you both. And thanks to everybody who's listening and watching. So we'll talk to you guys next time, and we hope to speak with you soon. Best of luck to both of you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Wow, Trina Wacasey and Agnes Dussault, everybody. As strong as they are kind and wise, they clearly understand the magnitude of their tasks at hand, and each approach them with their own brand of gentle seriousness. But what about the rest of us? Do we collectively understand the value of this type of work? Maybe we're starting to, and with guests like these, we'll certainly be pushing their message forward. So, until the next important message we push forward, please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and of course, YouTube. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Better Death Collective.